Hi, I'm Greg Patent, and welcome to the companion DVD for my cookbook, A Baker's Odyssey. In this DVD, you'll see me make some of the recipes from my cookbook, as well as a few general recipes and techniques that you're likely to use over and over again. So, happy baking! This is 1 cup of flour, but how did that flour get into the cup? In A Baker's Odyssey, there are 2 ways of measuring flour. The dip and sweep method, where you just take your cup measure, dip it into the flour to overflowing, and sweep off the excess, and this will weigh about 5 ounces. That's the first method. The second method is called the spoon and level method, where you spoon flour into the cup and then level it off. And that's how you measure flour for A Baker's Odyssey. Making pie dough, that's something people either love to do or they're afraid of doing, but let me show you that there's nothing to be afraid of. The basic pie dough recipe that I have in A Baker's Odyssey calls for unbleached all-purpose flour combined with a 1/4 cup of cake flour and a little bit of salt. And there are 2 kinds of fats that I like to use in my pie dough. One is butter and the other is vegetable shortening. Okay, here's the butter, and this is cold, unsalted butter that I've cut into tablespoon-sized pieces, and here is 1/2 cup of vegetable shortening that's chilled. Now, I know that when we talk about pie crust, we talk about tender and flaky. Well, in order to get tender, what you need to do is cut the fat into the flour so that you have small pieces of fat distributed throughout the flour so that you're getting your flour pretty much coated with fat. That's what makes for tenderness. I'm just cutting in with a pastry blender, and I have small particles. These are the small particles of fat of the shortening, which is going to give my pastry tenderness. And then here's this cold butter, and I'm going to cut that in with the pastry blender, but I'm not going to cut it in to the point where it's going to be in as small pieces as the shortening was. So I'm pressing down pretty firmly because this butter is very cold. Okay, I'm just about done. If you look closely, you'll see that there's some fairly large pieces of butter here, and that's exactly what you want for flakiness. And then to make everything come together, sprinkle water. This is 6 tablespoons of ice water and 1½ teaspoons of cider vinegar. And the vinegar also acts to hinder gluten development. So it's another little helper for you to make sure that you don't have a tough pie crust. And then just toss everything around thoroughly with the fork. And pretty much what you want is, you just want everything to kind of come together into a dough. And let me just get this out of the bowl. Put this right here so that you can see. This is a dough that's just come together. You see it's not at all sticky. And I have enough flour, and actually enough dough here for 2 single crusts. So I'm going to divide this in half. I'm going to set this piece aside. Now what you want to do with the dough, see, I'm being very gentle, pressing it together. Don't knead it, don't squish it. What you want to do is get a floured surface, pat your dough out into a cake. Now roll out from the middle and flour as necessary, but only as little as possible. Roll out from the center. Okay. Now, I have my dough right here. I'm going to fold it in half, get it into my pie plate, and then unfold it. Now at this point, you may be tempted to press down on the sides of the dough, but don't. Lift the dough up, nudge it gently into the pan, turn the dough around, turn the pie pan around, lift the dough up, nudge the dough right into the pan so that it adheres to the side and also the bottom of the pan without forming any kind of air spaces. And just keep doing this until the pan is lined. And there we are. It's very simple. Then take a pair of scissors and trim the dough to, say, about a ½ inch of overhang. Now you take this trim, your trimmed edge, and you fold it over to make a standing rim. And see, the dough is very responsive at this point. I mean, you can just pinch it together. Okay, so there you have your rim. And now to flute it, you just take an index finger, point it straight down against the rim, and then pinch with the thumb and index finger of the other hand. And then rotate the pan as you do so. And there's your pie crust. We're making cannoli, those crisp fried tubes of sweet pastry filled with ricotta cheese that comes from southern Sicily. And to begin, you make a dough consisting of flour, a little bit of cocoa, a little bit of granulated sugar and salt. And we're going to do this in a food processor because it goes by very, very quickly. Process these dry ingredients for, maybe 5 seconds or so. And then add 2 tablespoons of vegetable shortening. And if you prefer, you could certainly use lard, which would be more traditional. And then process for about 10 seconds until the shortening is cut into really small pieces. Makes a fine crumb mixture. And then start pouring through the feed tube 6 tablespoons of sweet Marsala wine. You could also use sweet vermouth. And the idea is that you want to form a dough. It's going to be like a pasta dough. So let's watch this gather into a ball and then process for 1 full minute. Okay, let's see what we have. Oh, this is very, very nice. And it smells of cocoa, and it smells of that wonderful sweet Marsala. Now, at this point, you're going to want to put it onto your counter and knead it for about 2 to 3 minutes. But you don't want it to be any firmer than this. And then also, as you knead it, you might notice that the dough breaks. You see what's happening to it here? It's just kind of breaking and tearing, and that's perfectly okay. This is expected to happen. So after 2 to 3 minutes of this, you'll want to take the dough and wrap it up and let it rest for at least an hour. Notice that it even darkens over time. And then during this hour, this dough becomes very supple, and we'll want to cut it into quarters. And we'll work with 1 quarter at a time. So you should keep those covered. And to work this dough, you'll need a pasta machine that you set at the widest setting, and then just flatten the dough and pass it through the machine, just like that. And then the dough will flatten a little bit, and then fold it in thirds. And then put it through at right angles to your first put through. And then you'll see it becomes almost rectangular. Fold it in thirds. And then turn it so that the open edge of the folds goes through. And then repeat this maybe 3 or 4 times. And then proceed to decrease the setting on your pasta machine. And then you're going to be putting your dough through your pasta machine at each decreasing setting just once. And if the dough feels at all sticky, at any point you're going to want to flour it because you don't want it sticking to itself. This is feeling just the slightest bit damp. So rather than take any chances, I'm going to just, and then dust it lightly with flour and then move on to the next setting. This is number 6. And since there are 7 settings on this pasta machine, this is where I'm going to stop. I don't want to go beyond the next to last setting. And this particular setting is going to get the dough very, very thin. Look at that. Look how it extended. So that's one piece. Now you have 3 more pieces, so you want to repeat this whole procedure with those 3 pieces. And then you should have this template. This is a 4.5-inch oval. And you just lay this oval directly onto your dough. And then just carve out ovals. There. This is a lovely little template. And then you'll need these cannoli tubes. You can buy these, they're stainless steel. They come in sets of 4. And there's no special treatment for the tubes. You just take the dough and arrange it lengthwise on the tube. And you'll see here how the ends just barely overlap. So take an egg white, dip your finger into the egg white, rub egg white along the exposed edge, and then just, when the seams meet, just pinch them together very gently. And then you're going to want to set this down on a tray lined with plastic wrap. And if you only have 4 cannoli tubes, then you'll just make 4 of these. And if you have more, then just keep rolling and cutting and making cannoli like this for as many tubes as you have. And then once the cannoli are at this stage, we're ready to fry them. When the oil is heated to about 360 degrees, drop 2 or 3 cannoli tubes into the oil, and in just a few seconds they'll rise to the surface. And they turn this pinkish color from the cocoa. One of these is getting done faster than the other one. You pick it up and see if you can shake it off the tube, and if you can't, just pull it off with some paper towels and then let the tube of pastry fall back into the oil. And then let me do the same thing with this. It should come right off very easily. There we go. And then they'll keep cooking for a total of about 2 to 2.5 minutes until they're just very crisp and bubbly and a deep brown color. And when the cannoli tubes are completely cool, you can store them for a couple of days in a covered container at room temperature and then fill them just before you want to serve them. Matzah is the Jewish flatbread commemorating the Exodus from Egypt, and it's unleavened. And to make it, it is really, really easy. You put into a mixing bowl 1 3/4 cups of flour mixed by the dip and sweep method, and then just gradually stir in 3/4 of a cup of room temperature water to make a dough that will hold together but is still slightly sticky. And as you add the water gradually, you'll notice the dough really looks very shaggy at first. But then it will eventually come together. And if it turns out that the dough doesn't come together, just add additional water by droplets until you get a dough that really holds together, just like this. Now, I'm going to test it because it should, I'll put it right here. You see it holds together, it still looks kind of shaggy, and it feels a little bit moist, but that's all you need to do. And then take a pastry scraper and then just divide the dough into 10 pieces. And then what you want to do is just cover this with kitchen towel and then let the dough rest for a couple of minutes. Now, once the dough has rested for a couple of minutes, then take a piece of dough, keep the rest covered, and then you want to roll it out on a floured surface. And what I like to do is use a pastry canvas. A board works perfectly fine, but make sure that your surface is really liberally floured. And then with a ball-bearing rolling pin, use swift strokes going back and forth. You can turn the dough around. You can flip it over. And the idea is that you want to wind up with a very thin piece of dough that's about 1/32 of an inch thick. And it's an uneven shape. So there's the matzah. It's very thin, very sheer. You can almost see right through it. And then get it onto a baker's peel or any kind of board that you can use to slide into the oven. And then you want to dock it, meaning prick it with a fork all over. And I have this tool here, which looks like an instrument of torture, but it really does the job. And then I'm going to bake it on a baking stone. So I have a baking stone here in the oven. I'm going to just slide this in, and it bakes for 2 to 2.5 minutes. And here is our matzah. This is just perfect. I want you to take a look at this. It's just barely tinged with brown, got lots of bubbles. It's already fairly firm, but when it really firms up, it will be very crisp. And what you'll want to do is store it in a paper bag at room temperature for 2-3 days or even longer, and serve it with hummus, tuna fish, liver paste, whatever you like. This is a wonderful all-purpose cracker. The Thai don't have a baking tradition, but they do have a tradition of baking things with batter, frying things with batter. And one of the batters they make is using rice flour, and this is finely ground white rice that is basically turned into a flour. And I'm going to use 1 cup of rice flour, 6 tablespoons of cake flour, this is just ordinary cake flour, a half teaspoon of salt, and then whisk this all together just to combine. Now for the liquid, I have here 2 things. I have here some effervescent liquid in this measuring cup, and I also have something pink and solid, and this is called limestone. And the Thai would actually take chunks of limestone, put it into a jar, add water, shake it up, and then when the limestone settled, they would have this very bubbly, effervescent water. And so this is a natural carbonate. This here is a bottled carbonate. Again, natural, but natural spring water that's carbonated. So I'm going to use that. I found both equal in terms of the results. This is kind of fun to use because it is really, really authentic. So pour in your liquid and then just whisk it around, and theoretically this liquid should sit, this batter should sit for about 30 minutes or so. Because it gives a lighter texture to the batter. This is like a pancake batter. Okay, like a fairly thin pancake batter. And then that's it. So let's pretend that it's been resting for 30 minutes. And then we'll add our bean sprouts. This is 4 ounces of fresh bean sprouts. And this is a ½ cup of raw shrimp in the shell that I took the shells off and cut the shrimp into ½ inch pieces. And here are 3 scallions and 2 garlic cloves. And you can also substitute garlic chives, about ½ cup of garlic chives for the scallions if you have access to them. And then just stir this around until everything is all evenly coated with the batter. And then we're ready to cook. Okay, heat up about a quarter to ½ inch of oil in a large skillet. Make sure that the oil is very hot, so do this over medium-high heat. And then take large spoonfuls of your batter and then just plop them in the oil. And this recipe should make about 12 of these Thai bean sprout and shrimp fritters. And get some of it in and then add a little bit more to it, like that. And then what you're going to want to do, you'll probably have to cook them in a couple of different batches, but cook them for about 1 to 2 minutes per side until they're very nice and brown and crisp. And then we'll flip them over and then cook them for another couple of minutes. So we'll give these fritters just a little bit more time before we flip them over. Okay, let's see how these guys are doing. I'm going to flip them over. Yes, perfect. Lovely golden brown. Flip them over and let them cook for, say, another couple of minutes. And then when they're all cooked, then remove them from the oil with your spatula and then set them aside on a tray lined with paper towels to drain. And after you've cooked all of your fritters, serve them right away with the recipe for the Thai chili sauce that is also in the cookbook. Making apple strudel is something that you will want to do over and over again once you master the technique of stretching the dough. That's really the trickiest part. I'm going to make the dough in a food processor, and to do that I'm putting in 2 3/4 cups of bread flour measured by the dip and sweep method that I talked to you about earlier on this tape. And then I'm adding 4 tablespoons of very soft unsalted butter and a ½ teaspoon of salt. And we're just going to process this for about 10 seconds. And this is just to mix the flour with the salt and cut the butter into very, very small pieces. And then the rest of the dough consists of a beaten egg. And what you'll want to do is to beat the egg in a 2-cup glass measure with a fork. And then add enough water to come up to the 1-cup line, and I'm just going to scoot down so that I can see where that 1-cup line is accurately. There we are. And then I'm going to add a ½ teaspoon of vinegar. Stir that all up, and then start the machine again. And then add this liquid through the feed tube, taking about 10 seconds. And then as more and more of this liquid goes in, the dough will gather into a ball right there. And then once that happens, you're going to want to process for 30 seconds. Okay, now just check the consistency of the dough. Pull it out of the machine, and it should feel fairly sticky, and it's fairly ropey, and that's exactly what you want. put it back into the machine, and then process for another 30 seconds. And that is it. There's your strudel dough, and it should be really silky smooth, and I'm going to put this out on the counter right here. And if the dough is too sticky, add about a teaspoon or even up to a tablespoon of flour and process that in. And if you find that the dough is too dry, it's got to be real supple. I want you to take a close look at this. See, it's not sticking to my hand, and I can work it. It's really nice and very, very soft and non-sticky. That's the texture that you want. Now, you need to develop the gluten in this even more. The machine does a very good job, but the hands do even a better job, and you're going to want to slap this dough down. Just pick it up and slap it down about 100 times. And this fully develops the gluten, this wonderful stretchy network of protein that will give you a strudel dough that you can stretch paper thin without tearing, and will be able to support the apple filling. So just keep doing this for about 100 times. 99, 100. And there you have a beautiful, supple dough all ready to relax. You've really worked it up to a frenzy of activity. And so what you want to do is put it into a bowl with a little bit of oil. And then after it's relaxed for a couple of hours, look how stretchy it is. Look at that. See? And you can see this is going to be just an absolute dream to work with. So you'll want to put your dough out onto a big table that you've lined with a tablecloth or a very clean bed sheet. And then if you can look, you'll see that I've dusted it fairly generously with flour to prevent the dough from sticking. And then take some of your melted butter and then just brush it gently on top of the dough. And we're going to do this because we're going to actually start to roll the dough before we actually stretch it by hand. And make sure that you center your dough right about in the middle of the table. And then take a big ball-bearing rolling pin. And then with gentle strokes, work your way around and start rolling it out. And you'll want to roll this out until it's about 2 feet long by maybe about 1 foot to 18 inches wide. One thing really important to